Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is writing lesson number 4. This is the vocabulary we're going to talk about in today's lesson. And along with our regular vocabulary words from the listening and the reading text from this week, we also have a list of these phrasal verbs that we've been working on. Our first word is crowd. In the reading, we saw the sentence, his studio apartment was like a jungle, with plants crowding the windows. So in this sentence, crowd is a verb. And we said that a crowd as a noun can also be a group of people. But crowd as a verb means when many people or many things come very close together, just like people in a crowd. So in this sentence, when plants are crowding the windows, that means there are many plants very close together near the windows. In the second example, we see crowd as a noun, a crowd of people gathered at the accident. And in the third example, we have crowded used as an adjective. The restaurant gets crowded at lunchtime. You can also see that crowd the verb can be used as an intransitive or a transitive verb. So if it's intransitive, you can just say people crowded at the accident. That means people came close together. There's no object. But we can also use it as a transitive verb, just like in the reading. Plants crowding the window. The windows here are the object. So you can say people crowded at the accident or people crowded the doorway. So that has a direct object. Our next word is remind. Remind is a transitive verb, which means to cause someone to think of something. In the reading, we said, looking at the plants reminded me of my mother's passing. This means when I look at the plants, it caused me to think of my mother's death. So we always have to say, remind me or remind you, remind someone of something. We can also use reminder as a countable noun, which is something that makes you think of something else. So in the last example, it says, his head injury is a reminder to everyone that football can be dangerous. That means when we look at his injury, it causes us to think that football is dangerous. So let's look at this verb a little more closely. There are a couple ways to use remind correctly. So first of all, we can say remind someone of something. So something can be an ing verb or a noun. So for example, this color reminds me of the ocean, or this song reminds me of swimming in the ocean. These are two nouns after the preposition of. Secondly, we can say remind someone that plus a sentence. So the sentence would have a subject and a verb. So for example, she reminded me that I have homework. Any subject and verb after that would work. Thirdly, we can say remind someone plus to and a verb. She reminded me to do my homework. In all three of these examples, we use the verb remind, followed by someone, and then either of plus something, that plus a subject and a verb, or to plus a verb. Our next word is neglect. And in the reading, we use neglect many times. In the first example, we said the plant was half dead with neglect. And in this sentence, neglect is used as a non-countable noun, a feeling, which means lack of attention, or maybe not a feeling, but a condition or a state. We can also use neglect as a transitive verb, like in the next example. She neglected her family when work got too stressful. That means she didn't give her family attention when work got too stressful. Then we have two different adjective forms. Neglectful means you are neglecting something, and neglected is when someone is neglecting you. So in the last example, if my friends forget my birthday, I feel neglected. So neglected is our feeling when someone neglects us. And in this last example, the friends are the ones being neglectful. We can also follow neglect with a to verb. So you could say, I neglected to do my homework. That means you didn't do your homework. Our next word is guilt. And guilt is a non-countable noun. It is a bad feeling when you did something wrong. In the reading, we saw the adverb form, which was guiltily. So guiltily, I put the plant outside, out of sight. and that means she did this because she was feeling bad. In our second example, we see the adjective form. I feel guilty for lying to my friend. And then in the third example, we see guilt used as a transitive verb. My mother guilted me into taking her on vacation. That means she gave me guilt. She made me feel bad. She made me feel like I did something wrong. So to guilt someone means that you give them guilt. You try to make them feel like they did something wrong. Modest is our next word. It is an adjective. In the reading, we described the plants being crammed into a modest basket, which means humble or plain. It means it's not very fancy. It's just okay. And here in the reading, we use the word modest basket to show that the basket was not big enough. It was a little small, which was why we had to separate the plants into pots. So here are two more examples. We just want a modest car, nothing fancy. Or the famous actor is surprisingly modest. And these are all adjective forms, but you can also use modesty as a non-count noun. That means the feeling of not being better than others. Our next word is admire, which is a transitive verb. Admire is similar to the word respect. It means you think that someone or something is really good. You think highly of them. In the reading, we said, I placed the plants around the house, admiring how their greenery cheered the place up. That means you're looking at the plants in a really good way. You feel good about them because you think they're good. In the second example, it says, she admires people who work hard. That means she thinks people who work hard are very good. And in the third example, we see admirable as an adjective. Volunteering to help the poor is very admirable. And that means we think that this kind of work is very good. Our next word is flourish. Flourish is an intransitive verb. It means to thrive, to do very well, to succeed. In the reading, we said the plants are flourishing in their new pots. That means once we put them in the new pots, they began to grow very well and to be very good. So another example would be children flourish with healthy routines. Or the adjective form, flourishing, he runs a flourishing dental practice. That means he's a dentist who's very successful. Our next word is constant. Constant can be a countable noun or an adjective, which is how we, or an adjective form. So the meaning of the adjective form is regular or continuous. It means it happens all the time. In the reading, we use the adverb form. I constantly look in on them throughout the day. Them is the plants. I constantly look in on the plants throughout the day. That means she does it often, regularly throughout the day. In the second example, this cat has been a constant headache since we got him. And this is a very common expression. A constant headache means this is a persistent problem. This is something that happens all the time. Constant as a countable noun is something very specific. So for example, pi is a mathematical constant. It's the number that never changes. We use the term constant often in math and science, but also in our lives. Like we can say, my brother is a constant in my life. That means you can depend on him. He's always there for you. Our next word is obsession. Obsession is a countable noun that means the state of thinking about something constantly. We also have an intransitive verb form, obsess, and the reason why it's intransitive is because it's followed by the preposition over. You would say, I obsess over this. I obsess over my plants. We have two adjective forms, obsessive and obsessed with. So obsessive describes a person. You can say he is obsessive. Like that means he is often thinking about things very passionately. Or you can say he is obsessed with something specifically. And then in the reading, we use the adverb form obsessively. Many people baby their plants obsessively. So in our second example, I wrote, my newest obsession is dead to me. Have you seen it? Dead to Me is this Netflix show that I've been watching that's really good. But this is saying that I am thinking about this show all the time. I really like it. I'm really into it. And our third example, he is obsessing over his new car. We have obsess as a verb followed by over. That means he is always talking about his new car. He's very interested in it. And finally, in our last example, we have obsessed, the adjective, followed by with. That blogger is obsessed with fashion. He posts 12 times a day about it. Manage to is a verb phrase that means to accomplish something difficult. So we don't call this a phrasal verb because it's followed by a verb instead of an object. So we would say this is just a verb phrase. So in the reading, we said, I managed to save the neglected plant that I'd put outside all summer. That means saving the plant was difficult, but I did it. Another example would be, even though he didn't study at all, he managed to pass the test. It would be very difficult to pass a test if you don't study, but he did it. He managed to do it. And in the last example, I don't know how you'll manage to finish that entire pizza. Again, we have managed to followed by a verb, and that means, eating a whole pizza is hard, but maybe you can do it. Our next word is gentle. Gentle is an adjective that means soft and carefully. In the reading, I said, when my daughter tries to tear the leaves off of my precious plants, I gently pull her away. That means I'm doing it nicely. I'm not grabbing her harshly and hurting her. Another example would be gentle with Mario. He's had a hard week. That means treat him really nicely and carefully because he's a little sensitive. He's been having a hard time. Our next word is respect. Respect is a transitive verb, and like I mentioned before, it's similar to the verb admire. So when you respect something or someone, it means you see it with a feeling of good admiration and care. So in the reading, I said, I'm trying to teach her to respect the plants. That means I want her to treat the plants well and think of them as good things. In the next example, we see respect as a non-count noun. Respect of one's elders is an important value in many cultures. That means thinking well of people who are older than you and treating them well is important. And in the third example, we see respected as an adjective. She is a highly respected hand surgeon. So that means a lot of people think she is really great. So here, respected is describing the people who we respect. And respectful is describing the person who gives respect. So you could say to a child, it's important for you to be respectful. And the older people are respected. Okay. Finally, we have our long list of phrasal verbs. So again, I've put the phrasal verbs into this chart so you can remember which ones are transitive. That means they have to be followed by objects. And which ones are intransitive, which means they have no objects. And then, of course, you have to remember which of these transitive phrasal verbs are separable and which are inseparable. And that's important because when you use object pronouns like he, she, them, or it, these pronouns have to separate the separable phrasal verbs. So, for example, I need to pick her up. I need to figure it out. You should look that up. However, for the inseparable phrasal verbs, when you use them with object pronouns, they don't separate them. So we would say, let's go look in on them. Let's make for it. I can't get into that. So these would be inseparable. So for these phrasal verbs, it would be a great idea to review them using the grammar worksheet from the site and to practice speaking with them in our next speaking lesson and to write a couple sentences with these phrasal verbs. So that's our writing lesson for today. So to practice, you should write a sentence using each new vocabulary word. We have a lot of vocabulary this week, so it's important to use these words and remember how to use them correctly. Secondly, you should summarize the week's reading in 1 or 2 sentences. And thirdly, here are some questions you can write longer paragraph responses to. You can answer these questions. What is your latest obsession and why? And describe a time when you felt guilty. What happened? So great work, and continue with tomorrow's speaking lesson, which will be the last lesson of Class 4. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.